Okay, thank you all for coming and tuning in to our weekly transportation webinar for the Regional Transportation Plan Update. Today we will be focusing on transit. So without further ado, I will go over our agenda. We're going to have a short presentation from our speaker today, Kira Smith, who I'll introduce in a minute. Followed by that, we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A, keeping this to 45 minutes total. Everyone is muted if you're an attendee, so you are muted. I do see there are a few call-in listeners. If you can't see the screen right now, we are recording this and we'll be sending out the recording afterwards. If you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window, the Q&A portion, not the chat, to submit questions. We will be having some folks looking at the chat and the Q&A and answering questions as we go, or saving them for later, and helping out with any tech needs. With that, I'll introduce our speaker, Kira Smith. Kira is an Associate Transportation Planner for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Kira supports transportation programs and plans that advance transit, active transportation, and emerging mobility initiatives at the Lake Tahoe region. Since joining TRPA in 2017, Kira has helped to develop monitoring and funding programs for transit, conduct demand analysis, and advance the region's transportation strategies through a new commuter program and marketing campaign. So I'll turn it over to you, Kira.
Awesome, thanks, Devin. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kira Smith, and thank you for joining us for the second webinar in our series on the Regional Transportation Plan. Today, I'll be focusing on transit, and we'll first give a quick overview of the Regional Transportation Plan for those of you who may have missed our last webinar on trails, or if you aren't too familiar with our planning process. I'll then give an overview of the key players in transit at Lake Tahoe, then move into some of our transit analysis, including examining the different travel groups we consider and how we study movement and travel demand. Technology is also playing a major part in transit service, so I'll touch on that, and then finally talk about what transit will look like in 25 years here in the basin. And then we'll have some time for Q&A, so make sure you add your questions to the Q&A box as we go along. So TRPA, in addition to being a regional regulatory agency, is also a metropolitan planning organization, which means that we are charged with maintaining the transportation plan for the entire Lake Tahoe region. The plan is updated every 4 years and spans 25 years and outlines the whole vision for transportation at Lake Tahoe. So all transportation-related projects go into the RTP, Regional Transportation Plan, including highway projects, bike path projects, transit enhancements, and a new transit center. These projects have to be in the RTP to be eligible for federal funding, so it's really important to capture as much as we can. The RTP also includes a funding plan and then strategies for implementation. And I mentioned this during our last webinar, that our focus for this update is on trails, transit, technology, and communities. Those are the 4 pillars of our regional transportation plan. And today we'll be focusing on transit. And actually, transit is probably the top priority for this plan update. So a lot of the analysis and planning we've done for this regional transportation plan so far has been really concentrated on identifying ways to improve transit at Tahoe. So before we dive into the future plans for transit, I wanted to give an overview of the key players in transit at Tahoe. On the South Shore, the Tahoe Transportation District provides local service with some regional connections to Carson City and Minden. The TTD also operates the East Shore Express from Incline Village to Sand Harbor in the summers. And then on the North Shore, the Tahoe Truckee Area Regional Transit, or TART, operates local service between Tahoma all the way to Incline Village and from North Tahoe to Truckee along highways 89 and 267. TTD and TART are the main public transit operators in the basin, but the private sector also has a role to play and has been stepping up over the past few years to provide funding for services and also starting to provide services. So Heavenly runs a few ski shuttles from the State Line Corps to the base lodges in the winter, and then Mountaineer is a new on-demand microtransit service in Squaw Valley that operates during the ski season. And I'll talk a bit more about microtransit later on. So the RTP primarily focuses on public services operated by TTD and TART, but for this update, we're also working to include some private services and coordinate with those private providers. And then TRPA is involved in transit primarily through planning, funding, and monitoring. TRPA does not operate transit service, but we gather data for planning purposes. We track transit performance over time, and that data is also used in planning. And then we also allocate federal and state funding to each of the public transit operators. So with every plan, we start with a vision and ask ourselves, how exactly can we achieve this? The 2017 RTP outlined this vision for transit, that we need a comprehensive and coordinated bus and shuttle transit system that provides seamless around the lake service. Service should be frequent, free to the user, and fun, with access to recreation destinations and urban centers. And I think this vision still holds true. And we have been working during this update to the plan to develop a plan for transit that achieves this vision. So this map on the right is actually our comprehensive vision for transit for the next 25 years. And I'll go into a bit more detail on this at the end. But for now, I'm going to walk you through the process and analysis that led us to this map. So if you've seen any of our presentations on the RTP this year, you have definitely seen this graphic. The last RTP analyzed the percentage of trips made to, through, and within the basin based on trip type. And so the different trips can generally be placed into one of three categories. Everyday Tahoe trips make up 20% of the total basin-wide trips and are generally defined as trips to the grocery store, trips to and from work, trips to soccer practice, and really anything like that. And then Visit Tahoe trips are 25% of all trips and are all the trips into and out of the basin from neighboring regions like Reno, Carson, Sacramento, San Francisco. And then last but not least, Discover Tahoe trips make up the majority of all trips at 55%. And those are trips that residents and visitors make to recreate. So we use this information really to guide us in our planning process and to form the basis of our travel demand analysis. So definitely remember this as I walk through the analysis and planning. So when we kicked off this update to the RTP, we met with stakeholders and our transit partners at TTD and TART and decided on a layered approach to building out the transit system over the next 25 years. Our first priority is the foundation rider. These are our everyday Tahoe travelers who don't have access to a car and rely on transit to meet their basic needs. So our analysis looked at the distribution of transit-dependent populations, walkability from existing transit stops, what we call a walk shed, and general basin-wide travel patterns to determine how best to serve that foundation rider. When the system is meeting the needs of the foundation rider, we'll then target the choice rider. So choice riders might have a car or another means of traveling, but would choose to take transit if it was a convenient or better option than driving. So to determine how to provide transit options for the choice rider, we looked at recreation hotspots and seasonal travel demand. And most of the trips made in the basin are recreation trips. It's that Discover Tahoe travel group at 55%. And so we know that transit needs to serve recreation hotspots if we are going to alleviate congestion. And then finally, once transit is serving foundation riders and choice riders, we can then focus on services that bring visitors to the basin without a car. And our analysis looks at mega region trip demand to determine where we can add transit routes to bring in visitors. So now I am going to show a series of maps that reflect our analysis and walk you all through the planning process. So this map is showing total resident population density on the South Shore. The yellow hatched boxes are highlighting the areas with the highest population density. And we're calling those hatched boxes the transit priority zones, which means that those are areas that would benefit from transit service. So we looked at all the different transit-dependent populations using census data and drew those boxes on each map to get a series of transit priority zones throughout the basin. Here is an example of one of the transit-dependent populations we looked at. In South Lake Tahoe, this is showing density of zero-car households, people who are very likely to depend on transit. Some other populations we considered are minorities, seniors over 65, youth, and low-income households. And we have maps like this for each of those populations around the basin. And again, we're looking at these populations specifically to determine how best to serve the everyday Tahoe traveler and the foundation riders. So here's an example from the North Shore showing the transit priority zones overlaid on a walkshed. Walkability is one of the things that we look at to determine accessibility to transit. And so the lighter blue shaded areas are showing a quarter-mile walking distance from existing transit stops, and the darker blue is a half-a-mile walking distance. And so ideally, the walkshed should cover all or the majority of the areas in the transit priority zones, which again are those yellow hatched boxes. So another thing we look at when designing transit service is trip density. So census data is great, but we see so many visitors every year at Tahoe, and we can't use census data to figure out how visitors are traveling. So these maps show trip density within the Tahoe Basin by season using cell phone data. So imagine a set of lines that each represents a unique trip. We basically took a sample of all the trips in a month, February on the left and July on the right, and then created a heat map with those lines. So the brighter yellow areas on these maps represent where more trips are taking place. And this data is obviously very useful when looking at where to add transit service. So for example, this map is very clearly illustrating the high trip demand on Highway 50 in South Lake Tahoe. And in our planning, we need to make sure that there is a frequent transit route along that portion of Highway 50. So if you listened into the Trails webinar last week, these maps will look familiar. This is showing recreation data in the winter on the left and summer on the right. And again, we use cell phone data in this analysis to figure out trip origins and destinations within recreation zones. And if you remember that Discover Tahoe user group makes up about 55% of all trips within the Tahoe Basin, to serve those recreation travelers, it's really critical to understand where people are recreating. And also Tahoe's recreation sites are seasonal, so any transit system we design has to be flexible and adapt to demand based on the season. And so our transit services need to be serving ski resorts in the winters, as you can see from that map on the left, and it needs to be serving beaches during the summers, as you can see from the map on the right. And then finally, to figure out how best to serve the Visit Tahoe user group, which makes up 25% of all trips, we look at mega region trip density. Using cell phone data, again, we were able to analyze a sample of trips between Tahoe and cities within California, Nevada, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, and Arizona. And it may be a little bit hard to see here, but the Highway 50 corridor into South Lake Tahoe is the most used, with almost 30% of trips between Tahoe and neighboring regions occurring along that corridor. So all of this analysis and all of these maps have played a huge part in designing the transit system for the next 25 years. And defining transit priority zones will help us determine how best to serve the foundation rider and everyday Tahoe traveler. Knowing where recreation hotspots are will help us design transit service for the choice rider and the Discover Tahoe traveler. And knowing where out-of-basin visitors are traveling to will help us establish transit options for the regional rider and the Visit Tahoe traveler. Another thing that we have been considering are new service models like microtransit. I mentioned last week during the Trails webinar that there are a lot of new active modes like scooters and e-bikes that are popping up all over the place and made possible by advances in technology. Well, The same thing is happening in the transit world. Microtransit is a new service type that is gaining popularity and changing a lot about traditional public transit. Microtransit is essentially like Uber or Lyft, but it's typically confined to a set area and most of the trips are shared. So the picture on the right is showing a van from the new Mountaineer microtransit service in Squaw Valley. And during its first season last winter, Mountaineer served over 80,000 riders. Riders were able to book the on-demand service through their phones, and then they could be picked up and dropped off anywhere within Squaw Valley, which was the defined zone for that Mountaineer service. And the service was back again this winter and remains a very popular transportation option. So we're definitely looking at services like this. And while we're seeing successes with microtransit on the North Shore, new microtransit services already planned for the South Shore. The new Tahoe South Event Center was recently approved for construction by the TRPA Governing Board and the Douglas County Commissioners. And part of the permit conditions included traffic mitigations, which resulted in a new microtransit service for South Lake Tahoe. So the blue area on this map is the new microtransit zone. So within that zone, riders will be able to call vans on demand and travel anywhere within that area. And then the purple line is a fixed route that will operate between State Line and Round Hill Pines. And that service was also part of the mitigation agreement. So the service will be free to the user and is planned to operate between June and September initially, and then will eventually become year-round. And we could see this service as early as next year or the year after. So here are some other new services that we'll see in the next few years. Back in December, TART went to free fare service, and a few weeks ago, actually, TTD also went to free fare service on the South Shore. So now every single public transit route in the Tahoe Basin is completely free to the rider. And we're working through this RTP process on plans to keep fares free for the long term. So a couple more really exciting things happening soon. TTD purchased 7 electric buses to add to their fleet, and they should be receiving the first order of 3 large electric buses this year. And you'll also start to see increased frequency on core local routes and hopefully extended hours in the next few years. And then I mentioned the seasonal microtransit service coming to the South Shore, and the Mountaineer service will continue operating during the winters in Squaw Valley. And then we also hope to bring back some specialized medical transportation for critical out-of-basin medical care. So we really hope to see a lot of improvements in transit over the short term, but our goal is to keep that momentum going long term so that we can eventually see a transit system that looks like this. I showed this map at the beginning of the presentation and then kind of walked you through our transit analysis. We used all of those maps and data and information to design this long-term vision for transit with our public and private operators. So the full build out of the transit system will look something like this. In-basin local routes will be free to the user. Core routes around the lake will be served by high-frequency routes that come every 15 minutes. A ferry boat will provide service across the lake between North Shore and South Shore, with some local water taxi service available between major beaches and marinas. There will be frequent service to ski resorts in the winters and beaches in the summers. Year-round microtransit will serve neighborhoods and connect riders to the more frequent mainline routes. There will be several mobility hubs in town centers and major recreation sites that will provide charging for electric buses and will also be equipped with bike racks and transit shelters. And then finally, there will be transit routes that connect to neighboring regions like Reno, Carson City, Sacramento, and Stockton, providing low-cost transit service to the basin so visitors can travel to Tahoe without a car. This build-out is ambitious, but with the right partnerships and an aggressive funding plan, we can definitely make this a reality for Lake Tahoe and begin to shift people out of their cars and onto transit. So that about wraps up our presentation on transit. Before we move on to Q&A, I wanted to remind you all that our next webinar in the series will be focused on technology, and that will be next Monday at noon and will be hosted by TRPA's Senior Transportation Planner, Melanie Sloan. And you can register by visiting trpa.org/RTP/get involved. We also added a new webinar called Innovative Transportation, where we'll be able to hear from some of our private partners on some of those emerging technologies. And that will be Monday, May 18th. And then also all of the maps I showed today are available online at trpa.org/RTP and under the travel analysis tab. So I definitely encourage you to visit that site and explore the data on your own so you can really get into the weeds. And actually, just a note about that, last time I checked the site, the maps were down, but I think our team is working to get those up by the end of the day today. So definitely visit that site and explore those maps this week. And with that, I think we can move on to Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, Kira. We've had some questions come in, and just reminding folks to pop things into the Q&A. This question is the Gardnerville-Kingsbury route also going to be free fare from South Lake Tahoe?
Yes, so TTD just announced on Easter Sunday that they moved to free fare on every single route. We're looking at ways to keep fares free, at least on the local routes for the long term, but for the next 2 years, at the very least, the routes to Gardnerville and Minden and Carson City are also free.
This next question is Meeks Bay going to have a bus stop or transit hub of any type for transit service to Meeks Bay?
Devin, I think you can probably answer
I do.
that
Yes, and Meeks Bay is on the list of planned transit stops for the West Shore corridor along connecting North Shore to South Shore through in the Emerald Bay corridor is in those plans. I think this question was referring to the electric buses, but do you, I guess I know the answer as well if you don't, what brand of buses the electric buses are going to be?
Yeah, so the first 3 electric buses that TTD ordered, I think they should be here this year sometime, and those are Proterra buses. So TTD just installed a new overhead charging station for those buses at the Lake Tahoe Community College with a really, really nice bus shelter. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. But that's where those buses will be charged. And then the other 4, so they have 3 35-foot buses that are Proterra, and then the other 4 are shorter buses. They're called cutaways, and I'm not sure exactly what the brand is of those, but I can look that up.
The next question is about balancing expanding service with being able to keep the system free to the user. You know, as service expands, is that going to still be free service, or at what point do you have to start charging again?
I think our goal for this, the goal for the 25-year build out would be to keep those local routes, the ones in the basin, free to the user. And so any funding that is secured long term would definitely need to factor in the cost of fares and replacing the fares that would otherwise be collected. And then some of those regional routes that go out to the neighboring regions might not be free, but definitely keeping the local routes free to the user is the long-term goal.
So this question's from Facebook. What technology improvements go along with the new transit or the planned transit? Traveler information, automation, connection, protection, etc.
Yeah, so both TTD and TART are already using real-time travel apps TART is using an app called NextBus, and then TTD uses an app called Swiftly, and they both allow the user to view where the bus is in real time. So that's one thing that's already happening. I know TTD is working on a brand new website that would incorporate the ability to purchase passes, although that's not really relevant anymore since they've gone to free fares, but could be sometime in the future when those mega regional routes out to neighboring regions are no longer free. They could, then the user could purchase a bus pass online, which would be easier. Microtransit is kind of already ahead of the game as far as making transit on demand. So any of those services that eventually do come to Tahoe, the user would use their smartphone and be able to basically hail the microtransit van to them, and it would be on demand within a zone. So those are definitely some of the things. We're also working on transit signal priority, which would allow, there would basically be a sensor on the buses, and when it approached the signalized intersection, the light would turn green quicker to allow the bus to get through the intersection faster, and that will hopefully make transit a more competitive option. So those are some of the things, and I think in next week's webinar on technology, Melanie will talk more about some of those.
Can you talk, this question's asking about connections for the water ferry on the North Shore. The map you showed had multiple connections on the South Shore. Are there also similar connections along the North Shore between Kings Beach and Tahoe City?
Yeah, that is a good question. We haven't actually talked about that too much for this RTP, but that could be an element in the future. I think we'll need to have those conversations.
Do you have any information about what steps transit agencies are taking to deal with COVID-19, making sure that the riders are safe?
Yeah, so obviously TRPA doesn't operate transit, but we do talk to the transit operators a lot. And what I know from them is that they have blocked off some of the seats around the operators, the bus drivers, so that the drivers are protected. And I believe they've also blocked off some seats to kind of ensure social distancing among passengers. All of the drivers have face masks, and I know that the drivers are definitely taking more precautions and working harder to sanitize the buses as often as they can.
This question I'll probably answer, but given the focus on the 89 highway corridor planning right now, can we accelerate public transit options there? And there is a South Lake Tahoe to Emerald Bay transit route and transit package identified in the 2025 short-term transit route. So we are looking at getting transit service out to Emerald Bay in the very near term. This question is, will there also be regional bus service to North Shore or only South Shore?
There will definitely be some service to Reno, between Reno and Incline in the long term. I don't really have information on exactly when that will happen, but the goal is absolutely by 2045 there would be service between Incline and Reno.
And then I did get a message from the Tahoe Transportation District about the water ferry. The current water ferry location is in Tahoe City in the North Shore.
Cool.
This question is, what steps are currently being taken to move towards the long-term transit plan? What milestones have been established?
I think it takes a lot of collaboration with our partners to get there, but the biggest hurdle right now is securing long-term funding sources. So both the public operators, TTD and TART, receive federal and state funding to operate transit, and that's fixed. It's a fixed amount, primarily based on our population. And so in order to actually achieve this vision, we need to secure additional funding. And that's definitely a long-term hurdle, but we are working on that collaboratively with a bunch of different stakeholders. So we are making progress.
Are there any plans to expand the capacity of local buses to carry more than 2 bikes?
As far as I know, I believe all of TTD's buses are equipped with 3-position bike racks. So I think they can all carry 3 bikes. And then as far as I know, anything beyond that is really unsafe because it extends the length of the bus more than is, I guess, it might be federal requirements.
Yeah, there are legal requirements on
Yeah.
how long those buses can be. But there are some innovative solutions that we've looked at in other resort communities with bike trailers. And there's also some private folks like the Flume Trail folks that do trailer bikes, and I believe several of the bike stores do. So doing bike trailers is something that we have identified as a strategy for getting more recreation users out enjoying Tahoe. This question is asking if the PowerPoint will be available later. Yes, we'll send out the video link and PowerPoint slides for everyone that attended. This question is, how soon do we anticipate extending transit hours of operation?
That I know is a really big priority for TTD. I don't know if TART has any plans to extend hours. They may extend a trip earlier in the morning, but right now TART operates service from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. And then TTD does have really immediate plans to add a late night route that would go through South Lake Tahoe and would extend the hours basically past when it currently ends around 8 p.m. And then in the next 5 years, hopefully we can extend the hours even more up to midnight, 2 a.m. on the South Shore.
Can you talk a little bit more about the marketing strategy and plan around getting people to change their behavior and getting out of their cars and riding their bikes in transit?
Yeah, so right now we have a campaign, I guess you could call it a campaign called Linking Tahoe. It's a partnership with TTD and TRPA. Our website kind of lists all the different options for travel to, through, and within Tahoe. And so we're trying to market that a bit more. Right now we distribute brochures all around town. And I know TTD currently has funding to market more of their transit services, which I think Linking Tahoe would be part of that. So we're definitely working on it. We know that it's a big need to start to market more of these options and let people know what their options are.
This question's about kind of the current situation and the effects of stay-at-home orders. Is there any data that TRPA will have to show, potentially have to show what impact that has had on our transportation system?
Yeah, I think we've already started we monitor a lot of data. We collect traffic counts, counts on bike pass. We have data on transit ridership. And so we're still in the process of kind of collecting that information and digesting it. And once we have something to share, we will definitely share all of that.
This person was just asking again when the Cross Lake Ferry, what timeline that was on.
The Cross Lake Ferry should, it requires full build out of kind of new piers. Basically, they have to build new docks for that Cross Lake Ferry and then actually acquire the ferry boats. And so we're looking at no earlier than 10 years probably. But TTD is currently in the planning phase of that and looking at all the different options. So it is moving forward.
Another question from Facebook. Getting more folks on transit is the goal, and we provide localized transit. What do we do with all of the tourists' cars?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, we're kind of taking a layered approach to transit in this regional transportation plan. Our first priority is to serve residents. We need to make sure that the transit system is built up and is really, really serving people who rely on transit to get to work, to get to the grocery store. So that's our first priority. And we still have some improvements in the transit system to make to get it to where we want it to be for our residents. Once that's in place, we'll then move to serving recreation sites within the basin. And then once we have a system that is working well, getting people to recreation sites, getting residents where they need to go, then we'll start to focus on getting tourists here without their car. Because if we start adding those routes now and the system isn't really built up in the basin, then once they arrive here without a car, they might not have that many options to get around without a car. So we need to make sure that the options for them to get around without a car are solid and in place, and then we can worry about bringing them here without a car.
And then the final question I had, so if you have any more questions and you're listening, make sure to get those in before we end. But I have a question here about how to discourage driving and generate funding for transit. What types of tools and strategies, like, this person mentions road tolling, but paid parking and reservation systems, what tools out there are there to discourage people from using their vehicles that could also potentially raise money to fund transit?
Yeah, actually a great example is what's happening on the South Shore with that new microtransit service that I mentioned. So they'll be adding the event center will be adding that microtransit service, and at the same time they'll also be adding paid parking at all of the hotels in the State Line Core. And so that will simultaneously discourage people from driving and parking, and then also encourage them with a free option to get around very easily within the tourist court and in the South Shore. And so that's kind of, I would say that our strategies, most of our strategies around the basin include multifaceted strategies like that. And so we are definitely looking at parking management, and free transit is a big step in the right direction, because now transit is a more competitive option. If folks don't want to pay for gas or pay to keep their cars up, they can now get on the bus for free. And so we're working on ways to increase the competitiveness of transit and make it a more attractive option.
Could you had a couple more questions come in. Could you touch on available shuttle and transit services for seniors or individuals that are unable to get themselves around?
Yeah, so both TTD and TART are required to provide paratransit, and that is available for anybody who is a senior over 65 or any individuals with a disability. You would apply for eligibility through the TTD and TART websites, and then you'll get kind of a card and be able to take paratransit. And actually now that fares are free all around the basin, that includes paratransit services. So I think it's definitely easier now to get around if you are a senior or if you have a disability.
The next question was, what about regional transit to the Bay Area? I don't know exactly the context, but do you want to touch on any of the regional transit in the plan that's connecting to San Francisco Bay Area?
Yeah, so in the long-term plan, by 2045, we hope to have connections to Sacramento and to Stockton. We don't have any routes that go all the way to San Francisco planned, but we hope that by adding options to Sacramento and to Stockton, folks who are coming up from the Bay Area could, park at an intercept lot and then hop on the bus. So they would leave their car out of the basin and use transit to get in. But yeah, that's as far as we have plans to go.
Someone was asking about the map with trip frequency, and Homewood was not on the map. I'm not sure if it was this map or one of the other maps.
Might have been this one, potentially. Either way, though, we do have plans to serve Homewood. There will be transit routes, as you can see from this map. there will be a transit route that serves Homewood and connects to both the South Shore and the North Shore.
Yeah. Going back to the event center at State Line and South Shore, is the paid parking at the State Line Hotel corridor just on the Nevada side, or is it also on the California side?
It will be both the Nevada side and the California side, as far as I know.
And is there any planned bus service to Myers?
Yes. So there are plans to add a local route back to Myers. This is likely in the medium-term time frame. But yeah, the route will be at least 30 minutes by 2045.
And then is there plans for regional bus service from Sacramento to North Shore via 80?
There aren't any plans for that in this regional transportation plan. I know that there are some private providers that currently do offer that service, at least on the weekends. But there aren't any plans to add a public transit route.
But with the resort triangle that you have there and the teal on the top connecting to Truckee, people will be able to, with a transfer, get from Sacramento and the Bay Area via 80 to North Shore. They would just have to transfer buses.
And actually, there is already a train that connects Sacramento and the Bay Area to Truckee.
And then do we have plans to work with some of those private providers that are looking at doing those routes and working with that private industry?
Yeah, I think that's already started. The event center plans will, this microtransit service will be operated by a private provider. And we've been definitely working with the folks at the event center and talking to the proposed operator of this service to kind of nail down this service. So we're definitely working a lot harder this round of the regional transportation plan to work with private providers and coordinate services.
Great. Well, that is our time for today's webinar. So thank you for all of the people that tuned in to learn more about transit and how transit is being implemented in the Tahoe Basin. There's some links on the screen to get more information, and we hope that you will join us next week for our technology webinar, same time, same place, and we will be sending out the video and slides of this afterwards. So thank you all, and we'll catch you next time.